Welcome to the new For Purpose CEO podcast.
I'm Michelle.
I am Danielle, and we are here to talk about being a CEO in the for-purpose sector. Each episode, we will talk about issues not-for-profit and for-purpose CEOs need to manage based on our 30-plus years of experience. It will be an honest discussion of the highs and the lows, helping you tackle the unique challenges of running a NFP.
Leading can be challenging and sometimes lonely. We get it. Join us and our guests weekly for an honest discussion about running a for-purpose organisation. We will be sharing practical tips, shared experiences and real-world stories to help you tackle the unique challenges of running a for-purpose organisation. So an interesting one that we were talking about earlier, which is talking about organisational culture. And then I guess it's really important that you as a CEO, so you obviously you'll have a huge impact on the culture and some ability to shape culture. But I guess one of the questions is, how do you know what your culture is and whether you've actually got the culture that you're hoping to have?
And you also want to be able to report up as a CEO to your board about the organisation's culture, because governance in itself is taking a much more attentive approach to organisational culture and understanding its importance on organisational performance. So
and risk.
And yeah, that's a good point, and risk. So what are some of the tools then to be able to measure, assess or understand the organisation's culture? What are some of the approaches you've taken, Michelle?
I think there's a few things that you should probably have in your toolkit as a CEO, because your board will or should, I guess, want to know about the culture and then want more than you just saying, oh, I think it's fine. Like, normally a board is going to want a little bit more proof. And so there are a number of ways of doing this. And I mean, one of the key ways is to do some form of culture survey. And, you know, that can be big, that can be small, that can be, 5 quick questions, that could be 10 questions, that could be, 60 questions. And so I think it's probably up to the CEO to decide what's appropriate in the circumstances, because I think it might be that you want a baseline, that you want, decide you're going to do an annual survey, or it might be that you've gone through a big change, a merger, a restructure, and you might just want to have a bit of a check-in. And so I think that a survey can help there. It's definitely not the only tool. You need to have a range of ways of letting staff give feedback. So whether that's town hall meetings or responses to, if you do a weekly email or a monthly email that people can respond, or check in through managers, have a meeting of your executive about what they've heard. So I definitely think there's a lot of different ways of doing it. But if we focus on something like a staff survey, I find they're very good for setting a baseline or taking a pulse in time. But you've got to be really careful around, is it appropriate to send out a 70-question survey? In most cases, no, because that's a bit dreadful.
And let's also be honest that all for-purpose organisations are generally stretched for resourcing. So asking whatever size organisation you've got to respond to a 70 to 100 questionnaire is also a commitment of time and resource that the organisation is making. So you've got to understand that as much as, sometimes those 100 questionnaire can be interesting to know. Will they be so meaningful for you that you can do something with that as well?
Yeah. That's actually one of the key points, right? Like, if you get asked to do a survey, generally, I would say people are not excited to do a survey. Generally, people aren't happy to be told they're going to do a survey. And I think if you want people to do a survey, they need to know why they are doing it, firstly. And then they need to know that what they say is going to be acted on, and so that it wasn't just a waste of their time. And possibly also that their confidentiality is going to be preserved. So they need to have some faith that if they reveal a problem or an issue, that their not going to be targeted or there's not going to be repercussions. And I mean, if you've got a culture with a few issues, then, you know, in my experience, the reason people don't want to do a survey or are fearful of doing a survey is that they are worried that they won't be able to speak the truth or their anonymity won't be preserved.
But the other reason to do a survey as well, taking that same concept of flipping it, is if your organisation doesn't already have good feedback channels, that whether it be through one-on-one support meetings, whether it be town halls, as you said, so, you know, a space where there's suggestions or rigorous continuous quality improvement channels or anything like that, that means there are staff who do see or experience issues in the organisation will use a survey as a channel to give that feedback or those particular insights. So think about like the channels in your organisation that captures feedback on a daily basis, and then whether it's a pulse or a annual or biannual survey, then if you don't have them, then that survey can actually also be really important.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think what you need to then do as the CEO is, you know, like if the board has come to you and said, oh, you know, we need to check on culture, please give us some proof. And obviously there are metrics, you know, turnover or, you know, like there's exit interview information. There's plenty of stuff where you can check on. But if we kind of zero in on something like a culture survey, then, you know, it's a bit like how long is a piece of string. So you could do a really short internal one. You could just ask 5 to 10 questions, or you could go external, get someone that you know, or there's plenty of people who do this. I've done this a few times for organisations. But one of the things I would say is that, you know, there's always a cost issue if you're going to go external. So that has to be balanced. So you've got what sort of resources do we have to put to this versus how important is it that staff feel that it's done by someone independent, it's anonymous, that, you know, the CEO, for example, isn't going to get everyone's responses, and it may or may not be an issue, right? Like, but if it is an issue, then I suspect you're not going to get the truth if there is an issue and it's done internally.
And you can probably use those metrics you referenced before around, you know, staff turnover, sick leave, or, you know, high levels of annual leave not taken, or performance issues. If you've got high ratios of performance issues in your organisation, they're obviously good lag indicators of where the culture may not be very well, but you, in a lot of ways, can't necessarily, or you don't necessarily know what to do with that particular data because it's not pointing you to the issues, it's pointing you to an indicator. So the culture survey is designed then to point you to the issues. So if those metrics are looking poor, then it's probably actually a good idea to get an external person to do the survey, isn't it? Because then to your point around that anonymity, building that trust with the workforce to say, it's important to us, we're making the investment, we want to hear from you. And obviously there's no fear of concern. You can be open because we need to know what's actually going on.
Yeah, and I think I have done for a few different organisations where I will build a survey around a number of key topics, and quite often I'll have a discussion and they'll say, oh, I'm worried about engagement, or I'm worried about turnover, or like, what is it that you're worried about? Or I'm worried about professional development or feedback. Or so you can tailor and emphasise what you think you needs attention. So I guess the first question is, what is the issue, or what is the problem if there is a problem? Like, what is the problem you're trying to solve or trying to investigate, trying to research? And if it's nothing in particular, then I would suggest that you do a more general. So I guess there's two questions, right? Internal or external, and that's going to depend on resources and going to depend on the level of trust and the need for confidentiality. And then what does it need to focus on? And if it's a general one, you're being asked to just set a baseline, then I think there's a few key topics that you'd need to look at, you need to cover. And these are not hard things, but I think if you get results back and they show, for example, a lack of engagement or a lack of motivation or a lack of job satisfaction, then, you know, these are pretty serious concerns to have with your staff. So what I normally do is ask questions around, you know, do staff feel recognised? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel that their skills are being used? Because I think something like if you feel that you've got talents that aren't being used, that's hugely demotivating. And so I think it's also a good way if you're, for example, a new CEO and someone says, no, I don't think my skills are being used, then, you know, that's potentially you've got other skills in the organisation you didn't know about that you can leverage. So I think, you know, it can be really, really positive. I do think you should always ask about internal communication, and that often can be quite a challenge, I think, in a lot of organisations to get right. And, you know, do people feel they know what's going on? Do they feel they know how decisions are made? Are they happy with the internal comms at the moment? And then always I ask about feedback. Like, do you get feedback? Does your immediate supervisor give you feedback? Are you comfortable giving feedback? Because I think one of the things which is really indicative of poor culture is there's this unwillingness to speak up. And whether it's feedback about a situation or feedback about peers or feedback about people who are reporting to you, you know, people need to learn how to give good, helpful, useful, constructive feedback and receive it, right? So if you're not getting useful feedback from your immediate supervisor, then staff won't know how they're going, right? How do you know that you're performing or not performing if you're not getting feedback? So it's really important to see as a CEO that feedback is being delivered throughout the organisation and in a constructive way. You know, if it's not being done well, then that's a real problem.
Also, I think in sort of an emerging trend in the broader sort of business context at the moment, emerging out of sort of whistleblower legislation and things like that, we ask our people a question like, do they know how to raise concerns or report issues in the workplace, and do they feel confident doing so? So we've got a range of different systems and structures in place. So, you know, as a leader, you're like, oh, we've got all these things. It's so wonderful. People have all these channels, but we use our survey to test that people know that there are channels, because we can't assume that everybody knows that. And then we evaluate that question's response to then drill down to go, well, are those channels, do people know about it, and are they effective? And are we consistently reinforcing that? And I think that's really critical in areas where, you know, you're delivering really high levels of support to very vulnerable members of the community. People need to know that if they see wrongdoing, that they know that they can report it and where to report it. So we don't just put the systems in place, we test it as well through our culture survey, so people feel that they can do that.
Ask them if they're comfortable to report things back.
That's exactly right.
Which is fine if you know there is a way to do it, but if you're not comfortable doing it, then that's a massive thing. And I actually thought you were going to raise another issue there, which is, you know, like if you're in frontline service delivery or you're dealing with vulnerable members of the different populations, then you can often have a very high stress job. And so you've got a number of people at risk of vicarious trauma, at risk of burnout. And I think one of the things to also check in is, do staff feel supported? Do they feel that they can express that they're stressed, that there is an EAP that they can actually use, that they, you know, is there flexibility? So can they, you know, if they're really starting to feel worn down, is there another way they can do their role? So I think there's questions around, how do you manage your workload? Do you feel supported in your workload? And like, the job is the job, but the question is, what's the support for the job? And so I think it's, you know, if you're dealing with quite a hard or emotionally hard job, that's okay as long as you're given the right structure around you to help you and support you. And I think you can just ask, you know, do you feel supported? Are you stressed? Are you given tools to manage your stress? I mean, quite simple and direct questions can actually give you really good information about how people feel. So I don't think these need to be tricky questions, and they don't need to be a whole lot of questions.
No, and they need to just be very direct questions where with very little ambiguity as well. I think that's important. So you, otherwise, as a leader reviewing the results, you yourself, because you don't understand the context or the perspective that the individual had when they, ticked on the button to answer it. And you don't want to be left thinking, oh, what did they mean by that? What does the organisation mean by that? But as the CEO as well, I think, one of the questions that I think is important for the CEO to make sure that is in a culture survey is a measure of the leadership of the organisation. Is, do senior leaders provide very clear direction? Do senior leaders communicate? Is there access to senior leaders? Does leadership's behaviours and actions align with the organisation's values as well? So, it's an opportunity for the leaders to get feedback.
Yeah, I'd probably split that into the leaders and then the values, because I think one of the interesting things when you get a disconnect in values and behaviour, it might be at any level of the organisation. I think it's particularly problematic if it's at the leadership level, because you've then got that poor example that new people come in and see that disalignment straight away. And so then that influences behaviour, I think, throughout. But I agree. I think you ask, do people's behaviour generally align with the stated values? And I also give some room for free text response as well. Do you want to explain your behaviour? Because, not often you get a lot, but every now and then you'll get a whole lot of written feedback. And normally that's not a good sign, to be honest. Normally if people have got a lot of things to say, it's not normally a good sign.
Unless they're saying good things. Because I've had experiences where we've got a lot of written commentary, but it's actually been good things. So people actually giving examples to their scoring, if that makes sense. So they've gone, I really like this organisation because, which is really helpful, because you get to be able to say, oh, that's the good stuff. That's the stuff we're doing well. That's the stuff people value and appreciate.
I actually always ask, what's the best thing about working here? I always ask that question, what's the best thing about working here? And then what's not, right? I ask both. But I always ask what's the best thing, because sometimes people, they just kind of assume that, right? What's the best thing? Or the best thing is that I've got flexibility, or the best thing is that we have, morning tea once a month. And it might be something that you didn't actually realise how important it is, but bringing people together, giving them a chance to kind of get to know each other.
Yeah, and that's the stuff you get to turn into your employee value proposition as well when you're recruiting, because, that's the stuff that those individuals are also saying externally to their friends and their peers and other colleagues and stuff like that. So use that information. So once we've got a survey results, the next big thing is what to do with it, because you can't just keep asking for feedback otherwise and not do anything. People will stop giving you feedback. But what do you do with it?
Yeah, and the one sure way to completely alienate or annoy your staff is to ask them their questions or for their opinions or for their thoughts and then ignore them. So condition of me doing any surveys and external is that the results are shared. They have to be shared, and shared in a way that does preserve anonymity. But I think one of the strongest ways of sharing results is to say these are the themes that are coming through. These are the messages that I'm hearing when I look at this. So I don't think it's that helpful to say 4 people said this, 3 people said this, 2 people said this. I don't think that's helpful, because it's the so what, all right? So if 70% of people say this is an issue, so what, right? We need to actually talk about where are our areas of concern, what do we therefore need to think about, what should we discuss? If asked a question said, do you get a chance for professional development, or are you offered courses or whatever, and everyone says no, then that's one thing. But if it's actually no because there's no resources, or no because we don't do it ourselves, we do it through our peak body, or we do it somewhere, you have to have a little bit more of the reasons for discussion, yeah?
So I was going to say, so that's the dialogue. So that's you get the results, you present the results, so everyone sees the consolidated report or summary or whatever is the best format, and then use that as a tool to initiate a discussion.
100%. I would say this is what I'm seeing. This is the areas of concern. These are the areas that I think are strong and strengths. These are areas to be celebrated.
And then this is what we're doing?
Yeah, then in action. So as an external, I would talk with a CEO. I would suggest that this is presented. I can present it. They can present it. Presenting it with the view to having a discussion about now what? Like, given these results, what do we need to do? And I think that's where you get a really high level of engagement, which is, okay, we listened. These are the things which you like. Let's keep them. These are the things which you don't like. What can we do about them? Not everything can be changed, and I would strongly suggest not everything should be changed at once. But if it's really obvious through comments that there's areas for concern, then you need to have a discussion around how they get addressed and get some buy-in and agreement through whether it's the senior management or all staff, depending on the issues, right? But there needs to be seen to be action. Otherwise, what was the point of doing the survey? Like, from a staff perspective.
Absolutely. And I think also, just while you're talking, I was reflecting on an experience that I've had in the last little while as a CEO doing a culture survey. There was a part of the organisation that scored lower than other parts of the organisation, and I had a particular view about what I thought that meant, actually. Mm-hmm. And we have we run a focus group, or we get a group after it to evaluate, which is a cross-section of the organisation, to go through what we think the results mean. And I had to almost suspend my reality as part of that conversation and take on a little bit more of an inquiring approach and saying, this is what I think people mean. What do you think is actually meant by this? And I got completely different.
So are you asking those staff what they...
No, I'm asking about the results. How do they interpret the result, and what do they think people want when they're giving that particular score? So it's not about how the individual scored it or what their view is, but it is about what they think their peers mean. It was really interesting, I have to say, because what I thought was important, or what I thought was driving that score, the team around it was saying, oh no, we think it's this. So that was so good to do. It was really interesting, and I was really glad, because what I thought it was actually, I thought it was an area that I needed to work on, to be honest. And they were like, oh no, this has got to do with our managers. And so it's sort of like, oh, okay, if I had just evaluated that in isolation, I would have been way off the mark. So
you would have been doing all this deep reflection when actually it wasn't needed.
It had nothing to do with it. And it wasn't a big thing, but it was one of those things where it was so important. As I said, I had to suspend what I thought my reality was and be really curious and really inquiring and really listen to the answers and just continue to sort of ask questions around not the why questions, but the what would that look like, and how would you expect that to play out, and what can be the outcome, and to really get more of a deeper understanding as to that result. It was so powerful and so meaningful. And also it was one of those things where you're like, oh, okay, well, through those conversations, then people were able to give suggestions when we're giving ideas about how things could actually be done. So it was actually a really good collaborative discussion that played out.
And some of the feedback might be challenging, especially if you're the CEO and people are pointing out things that are wrong, not necessarily with you, that might be with you and your management style. But if there's issues that people feel you haven't addressed, then that can be quite confronting, and you have to handle that feedback well. And it can be a bit humbling when someone says, oh, actually you don't do that very well, and you have to think, okay, I now have to go to my staff and say, this has been pointed out.
But it shows such respect to your staff to have that humility and to listen to that.
And I think it's a really powerful thing to do, but I think it is a hard thing to do. But I do think it will also pay off, right? Like, I think if you've asked for someone's opinion, you don't necessarily have to agree with it, but you have to respect that they have taken the time to give you their opinion, and then you can discuss what that means and, what you're going to do with it. So I think that's kind of culture surveys in a nutshell.
I think we've demonstrated all the benefits of doing a culture survey, what to understand, what types of questions to potentially ask. Should you outsource it, have an external person? Why? What's the benefits of having an external person run a survey for you? What to do once you've got those results, and then the actions that you can potentially take when the results come through.
Yeah, I think it's a really powerful tool.
Yeah, absolutely.